Hello everyone. I hope everybody is fine. So in continuation with my deliberations on the topic of the Indian economy with specific reference to the monetary and fiscal system reforms post 1991, we already have covered in my previous video that was released yesterday about the monetary reforms that took place after the 1991 reforms that were taken up by Dr. Manmohan Singh, the then finance minister. The next in the same context is the fiscal policy, because monetary policy and fiscal policy, even though they remain separated now after the 91 reforms, they cannot be complete without mentioning the role of each other in the process of the Indian economy. So today I'm going to discuss about the fiscal policies, what was the state before 1991, what reforms were done in the various components relating to this fiscal policy, for example, the direct taxes, the indirect taxes, and many other related aspects. So all these things will remain the point of discussion. I am Professor P.K. Pathak, and we'll be having quite healthy discussion on the or deliberation on this particular topic of high significance, and a number of questions will be definitely asked in your examination, the RBI phase 2 grade B examination. So I hope all of you will note down all the important aspect relating to these particular points, and shall keep your notes for reference in the future preparation endeavors. Before proceeding for my deliberations, I'll urge all of you to do like, share, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and keep on receiving very significant videos on the latest topic apart from your topics for the examination preparation concern. And that also I'll be starting very shortly. Okay, so first I'll share my slide, and then we'll start with our discussions or deliberations. I hope this is visible to all of you. So this is our topic, as you can see. The fiscal policy since reforms of 1991. The monetary policy we already have covered up yesterday, and by now you know that the monetary policy is largely taken up by the Reserve Bank of India, and the disassociation of the monetary policy from the fiscal policy has given a lot of freedom to the banks to control their own affairs and to decide on their own functionality. So now let us discuss what exactly the fiscal policy is and what relates to the fiscal policy. Okay, so that will start. You see, fiscal policy is a critical component of the policy framework. And basically, fiscal policy is about the revenue collection and expenditure of the government on various welfare and infrastructural development costs. Because as such, the government has not got any income, but it has to carry out a lot of functions for the country. So therefore, this is the only way. It has to collect revenue from the people in the different forms of the taxation, and utilize it for various purposes. It may be a welfare programs. It could be the industry boosting up stimulus package. It could be some infrastructural development, modernization, advancement, and whatever you call it. For all these expenditure, the only source of income for the government is through the tax collection by various means. Okay, so what the government of India needs to do in order to achieve the objective of the economic growth, price stability, and the equity, it has to raise more resources to taxation. At the same time, it has to restrain the growth of unproductive and non-planned expenditure to a minimum. You see, this is what we do at our house level. For example, for your individual household, me and you, we have been all taking these efforts. So you just imagine at such a huge country with 140 crore of the people, what the government needs to do in this hour of crisis. So the reforms were definitely needed even in the 1991, because the state of affairs, as we have discussed yesterday, it was really pathetic because of the faulty policies relating to the economic, advancements of the country. So, in post 1991 reforms, and especially since 2001 and 2, the central government follows the prudent fiscal policy comprising the balanced tax structure of direct and indirect taxation based on the moderate tax rates, covering a wider class of taxpayer. What happened was that prior to 1991, there was unwise tax collection wherein people were charged a very high rate of taxes, and a lot of exemptions were given to many others. So here, 2001 onwards at least, the tax structure became more balanced so as to cover a wider class of the taxpayer. And also the government ensured that a expenditure policy that aims to restrain the growth of non-development expenditure is put into the place. This also adequately provides for pressing social and infrastructural need of developing economy. So the government became very cautious about its expenditure and ensured that all kind of redundant expenditures are being done away with. Now let us focus on the tax reforms that took place. As you understand, to raise the more revenues from achieving growth, the tax GDP ratio has been sought to be raised. So basically, the complete GDP. What is GDP for that matter? It is the total, value added or the value produced in a particular year in the country. And so value out of all kind of production activities and the service sector activities. So all combined together, whatever is the monetary value, we call it the GDP. Now, what percentage of tax you are collecting, or what percentage of GDP you are collecting as a tax, is a matter of concern. And you need to raise this figure to the maximum level in order to be more profitable in tackling the fiscal deficit. Okay, so what happened after the reforms of 90s, specifically the tax reforms? It sought to bring about a compositional shift in the structure of the tax system. How it was achieved? It was achieved through the progressive direct taxes for raising resources in place of excessive dependence on the regressive indirect taxes. Okay, so our modification was progressive direct taxes, so that increasing the wider range of the taxpayers in the process. Okay, and the ultimate motive was to accelerate the economic growth with this step. Also, in order to ensure the competitiveness of the product of the Indian industry, the excise duties and the custom duties were reduced. And these were reduced so that the rapid growth of Indian export is possible. Because unless and until you reduce the excise duty, the cost of production is going to be very high for the Indian manufacturers. And if you are supplying your exports at a very high cost, probably it may not be accepted in that particular way. So all these things were done away with or reduced to a considerable level. About the custom duties, they were also reduced to open up the Indian economy. Earlier, people were very apprehensive because a huge amount of the custom duty was imposed on the items coming from the foreign. So custom duties were reduced, and how much they were reduced we'll try to explore in the following slides. And the reduction in the revenue due to these reductions in the excise and custom duties, they were compensated by imposing a service tax, because Government of India realized that in the service sector there was a lot of scope because the largely service sectors were growing with a very high pace. Okay. So what inferences we can make out of these discussions is that much of the public expenditure is of committed nature, such as interest payment, services, the past public debt, expenditure on the defense, pension and wages. So you cannot do away with any of this expenditure. They are almost, you can say compulsory expenditure. So since you cannot do away with any kind of this expenditure, so that means the compression of expenditure in the short run is not possible. So what is the alternative? The alternative, in order to accelerate the growth and employment generation, raising revenue has to be done by improving the quality of expenditure. Okay. So this is the inference what we can make as of. So to be very specific, let us now discuss about the reforms in direct taxation. And you will realize that in early 80s, direct taxes were really very high. And so exorbitant that evasion of these taxes was very rampant. People used to, do away with all kind of tax submissions on one pretext or the other. And black money was enormously high in the Indian economy due to all these public policies. So what we did is, during the last few decades, there has been significant reform in the taxes. And to make it more competitive and acceptable, the direct taxation rate, specifically on the income tax and the corporation tax, has been lowered to the very moderate levels. So we have achieved two things. Moderate rate of these taxes mean that increasing tax compliance takes place because people are not worrying about very high, proportion of their income is going to go to the government. And secondly, the wider coverage of the taxpayers. So these two things were aimed to be achieved in the long run. Okay, so now this is how the things happen. The chronology you will see, the VP Singh government in 85, VP Singh as a finance minister in 85-86 cut the maximum marginal rate of interest to 50%. So just imagine, even 50%, it is quite high. And that means before 85, it was even much more than 50%. And even today, the 50% rate of interest is only applicable in the handful of countries, 9-10 countries, which charge even today 50%. And also the personal income tax slabs were reduced from 8 to 4. 7 years later, Dr. Manmohan Singh reduced the maximum income tax rate to 40%, and the income tax slabs reduced to only 3. And improvements were taken up by the Chidambaram government, Chidambaram being the finance minister, reducing the rate of income tax to 30%, and but he put the efficiencies of 3% on both the income tax and the corporation tax. So as regard the corporation tax, also you can see the Manmohan Singh cut down the corporation tax from 40% to 40% and reduced the exemptions so that wider base of taxpayers is paying visible. Chidambaram further reduced the corporation tax to 35% in 97-98, then further to 33% 2004 and 5, and lastly he reduced it to 30%. Okay, so but to broaden the base of the corporation tax, he lowered the depreciation allowance tax from 35% to 15%, and thereby increasing the wider base of the taxpayers. Because this is a sort of manipulation wherein the corporation used to show a lot of depreciation in their plant and machinery and the other assets. But so since this was reduced to maximum of 15%, this gave rise to the wider base of the taxpayers. Further, the base corporate tax for existing companies was reduced from 30% to 22%, and for new manufacturing firms incorporated after 1st October 2019, starting operation before 31st March 23, the rate was cut down to 15%. And further, to raise the revenue from corporate taxation, the fringe benefit tax was levied payable by the corporate employee. So these are the chronological effects, the improvements over a period of time, and ultimately trying to achieve the goal of maximum tax collection. Now let us understand how the fiscal deficit financing is taking place. And already I have told you that fiscal deficit is the difference between the revenue collection and the proposed expenditure of the government for that particular financial year. So to begin with, the fiscal deficit can either be financed by the government monetization, that is printing of new money by RBI, or borrowing from the market. And in both the cases, the inflation is going to be very high. So what is the government monetization? Say, for example, you have a 20% shortage of the money. And suppose, for example, you require 10,000 and you have only 8,000 with you. Okay, so what do? From where you can get 2,000 rupees? You can print currency notes. So you have 2,000 rupees more. But this has got a repercussion is in the way that the notes represent the actual assets that you hold in the form of the gold or other similar assets. So now, since the quantity or the amount of that particular asset remains same, so the increasing number of notes against the same asset is going to reduce the per unit value of the money or the note. So this is giving rise to the inflation. The other way could be borrowing from the market. Now, excessive borrowing also will increase in public debt and raising the burden of the future generation. This will also lead to increase in the the rate of interest, and all this will have cascading effect on the rising inflation. Apart from that, excessive government borrowing from the banks it is going to dry up the banking resources for private sector, and it should reducing the availability of credit for the private sector. So as I told you, even from the market, if the government is trying to borrow the loan, it will raise the interest rate, it causes increase in the cost of credit, and ultimately impinges on the profit margins of the private entrepreneurs. So what was the rescue then? So on the advice of the IMF, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act was passed in 2003 and 4. So what it was planned under this particular act was to eliminate the revenue deficit completely by 2008 and 9, and to contain the fiscal deficit to 3% of the GDP by 2008 and 9. However, this could not be achieved, and you know why? Because of the 2008 global economic crisis. So what happened actually was the fiscal deficit rose to 6% of the GDP in 2008 and 9, and 6.5% of the GDP in 9 and 10. And why this happened is because owing to the global financial crisis of 2008, a lot of the fiscal stimulus programs wherein the government expenditure had to be increased and indirect taxes reduced to keep the momentum of the economic growth. This all resulted into such a huge, fiscal deficit. Now let us come back and see the reforms in the Indian indirect tax system. The early 90s, if you see, the excise duties and sales tax were levied on the inputs, which had a cascading effect on raising of the prices of the final products. So to do away with this, the implementation of VAT happened in April 2005. This eliminated the effect of the sales tax and also helped in achieving the price stability. Now, as far as the excise duties are concerned, okay, the multiplicity with tax reforms initiated in 1991, the multiplicity of the tax rates of central excise duties were removed with a few exemptions, and it was achieved through a single excise duty called Senvet, which was at the rate of 16%. So what it was argued that this will remove the distortion in the tax system as a result of multiplicity of rates of excise duties. And as I told you, service tax and revenue mobilization, because as you can see, over the last 4 decades, there has been a structural change in the Indian economy, and the service sector sharply increased its contribution by way of 54% of the GDP in tax collection. Okay. So, for example, in the year 2013 and 14, the service tax was collected to the tune of rupees 1.80 lakh crores. What happened in the custom duties? Dr. Manmohan Singh, you see, the custom duty used to be prior to 1991, it used to be up to 2,200%, the peak tariff rates. So Dr. Manmohan Singh, realizing its impact, he reduced to 50% post 1991. Okay, and the import weighted average tariff rate from 80% to below 30%. Then successive finance ministers further reduced the peak trifurcate, that is the custom duty, first to 35%, then to 20% in Jan 2004. And ultimately, it was reduced to 10% in 7 and 8. Okay, so this has actually rationalized the whole thing in the process, and we have become a better economy in terms of various kind of import and export related duties. Now coming to the GST has been a further improvement, which is has been implemented for last few years. So what is the GST? It is the tax on the goods and services which is payable at each point of sale or provision of service, because even the VAT was having a lot of flaws. So all the flaws have been removed by implementation of the GST. And as you can see, it has simplified the process. And the example you can see, because the GST subsumes the following tax prevalent in India. And all these kind of, taxes, central excise duty, duty of excise, duties of customs, service tax, state value added tax, entry tax, purchase, all kind of taxes, they were combined together just in the form of GST. It will be a percentage, a specific percentage, depending on the product basis, and simplifying the whole thing and bringing uniformity across the country. So this was really sort of what you call the revolution. These are some of the benefits of the GST. It is comprehensive. It is multi-stage because it is levied on each stage of the supply chain. And under GST, the tax is levied only on the value added, and it is collected on the point of consumption. So it is more rationalized. That. Finally, again coming to the reduction in fiscal deficit, you can see as the fiscal deficit is the difference between total government expenditure on revenue and capital accounts and the total sum of revenue received and non-debt capital received. The fiscal deficit basically measures the total borrowing from the market, net borrowing from the RBI, small savings and external assistance. So a large fiscal deficit has been a major macroeconomic problem. And this can be seen in the acute balance of payment problem in the early 80s and 90s. Okay, and which is why the IMF came out suggesting few measures which were implemented through an act passed in the Parliament in 2003 and 4. Okay, so the act was the Fiscal Responsibility and Business Management Act 2003. And it prescribed to achieve the target of fiscal deficit to 3%. Already we have discussed in the previous slide. And for achieving this, what was required was to raise the tax GDP ratio on one hand and reducing the non-planned expenditure on the other. Also, it can be raised by widening the base of the direct taxes. Okay, and the government also needed to do away with various exemptions, like you can see many corporate companies, in spite of a lot of huge profit margin, they pay only 10% or even less corporation tax against 30% levied on them because of these exemptions. And there will also a few more examples. It is interesting to note that because of these exemptions, the Reliance industry did not pay any corporation tax for several years, in spite of getting huge profit margin. And Reliance is not only one; there were several other companies which took the benefit like this. So therefore, what the central government did, it enacted a minimum alternative tax, according to which all these profitable companies which did not pay corporation tax would have to pay this minimum tax. Okay, So the introduction of service tax in 94-95 also ushered in a major change in the indirect tax collection. And GST, we already have discussed. It has been really revolution in the Indian economy and has already started paying dividend in terms of very high collection for year after the year. Even during the corona pandemic situation, we had a very high collection in the previous financial year. So that's a lot. That's for the day. And I thank you very much for being focused till last of the presentation. All the related concept, I hope you might have grasped and might have made some small notes in the process just to get a review of this. This was the topic. And I hope that in case you feel any problem, you can discuss with me, you can connect with me through my mail ID, which is reflecting here. So on this note, I'm stopping the presentation for the day. Finally, I urge all of you to do like, share, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel and keep on receiving the interesting videos. Get in touch with me for any kind of queries, subject related or something relating to the field of management, and I'll be very happy, more than happy to share some of my inputs with you in the similar mode. So, okay, on this note, now I conclude for the day, and hoping that all of you will be coming out in the flying colors and all your successive efforts for in the career. And on that note, I'll stop for the day. Thank you very much. Have a nice day and good luck.